What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Talk of the Tundra, your Green Bay Packers podcast as a proud partner of the Eurostop Podcast Network and the Blue Wire family. As always, I am your host, Numac, coming back to you with another podcast. This time, we're diving into the draft prospects. We are just short of 3 weeks removed, or just longer than 3 weeks removed from the draft kicking off at 1265 Lombardi Avenue. And on today's pod, we're going to dive into all of the prospects. I should say all of them. That'd be a very Jordan is diving into the video screen. That'd be a lot of prospects to go through all of them. But players on offense, we expect them to take a look at in the first 3 rounds of the draft. So I've already said his name. Jordan, how you doing, buddy?
Hello, I'm ready to talk draft in my uninformed
That's not true.
state.
That's not true.
Somewhat informed. I don't have any. I'm not going to be like, hey, the first overall pick is going to be blank.
No, that's not what informed means. You're not an insider leaking picks. You've been watching football longer than most people. You know what good players look like. You know what bad players look like. We took a look at some of these guys' college tapes, and we're gonna go through and see what looks good for the Packers in the first 100 picks of the draft. But before we get to that a little later, some news coming out of the Packers franchise this week as the NFL had their annual owners meeting and some other comments as well. But even further moving from the point, hilariously, after the day we published last week's pod, last Thursday or last Friday, news breaks that the Packers sign
Mm.
linebacker Christian Welch back after he was, I believe, cut from the team as part of last year's roster cutdowns, and then signed with the Broncos or the Ravens. I forget which.
Yes.
Um, Actually, a split time between the both of them last year, so I'm right twice. But we had talked when we were talking about approaching the draft that we didn't want to see the Packers spend a draft pick on linebacker for the sole purpose of they have plenty there. They just need to sign a veteran, and that's exactly what they do. So, uh, Christian Welch played for the Packers during the 2023 season, took one defensive snap versus 237 special team snaps. Did have that interception that I think was a pick six in the preseason last year. Um, as I mentioned, he split time between the Broncos and Ravens last year, and the addition of him into the room gives the Packers five linebackers heading into the season with Jordan Quay, Edger Cooper, Isaiah McDuffie, and Tyron Hopper. Honestly, I'd imagine that this room just stays looking like this through the start of the season. I don't think they'd. I'd be very surprised if they carried six or cut someone to carry forward into the season. I think this will just be the locker room for the season.
Yeah, I totally agree. Just any additions is going to probably be practice squad guys vying for another roster spot. But if that memory serves, they carried five going into last year with the formation change.
Yeah,
Obviously,
they just swapped out
Cooper.
they swapped out Christian Welch for Eric Wilson, and it's the
Yeah,
same room. So I'm fine with it. I think there were a lot of people on Packers Twitter last year that were kind of surprised that he got cut. Um, at cutdowns, I think he played pretty well in the preseason and played well during camp. So I'm welcoming him back for the sole purpose of understanding that he's more or less a depth guy. Like with Quay's resurgence, I'll say. Edgerrin Cooper continuing to play, Isaiah McDuffie having a role, and then they want to see if they have in Tyron Hopper. Like I just think that they're going to roll with those four, and then if Christian Welch needs to be thrust into duty, he'll play when he needs to.
yeah. They're born again. Christianity has come back into their life.
That's right. That's right. Um, so that being said, let's get to the news out of the owners meeting this week. A lot of news from both Brian Gutekunst and Matt LaFleur. We'll start
And
with
Mark Murphy.
I missed Mark Murphy's comments. Do you want to
Mark
give?
Murphy, I didn't realize that. I mean, he's obviously the stand-in for the Packers owner, even though we aren't owned, right? But he was also
Don't
had
put
some
in the paper that
comments.
I'm owned. That's a drill tweet.
A drill.
Go ahead, sorry.
Um, no, I was just gonna say Mark Murphy had some interesting things to say in his last appearance at league meetings because he's not the
Yeah, because he was talking about the tush push and how the rules committee was talking about that. I guess they deadlocked at 16 to ban it,
yes they did.
which was interesting. So they tabled it until May, which we'll get to a tiny bit with Matt LaFleur's comments.
Why don't
But
we just do it right now? Because
sure,
I feel like that is the biggest thing to have come out of this. Do you have an opinion?
on the tush push,
Yeah, if it should be banned or not. Is it a football play?
um,
Numac, go.
I think it's a football play, but not the way the Eagles use it. A lot of the time you see the Eagles use it, they're all lined up on the line of scrimmage, which is offside. And so I'd like them, like if they're going to do it, I'd like them to be more stringent and more strict with how they enforce penalties on that play. Um, and I don't have a problem with it being a play because all like it, I understand that the context of like shoving ball carriers used to be illegal. Like that's where the famous Ice Bowl picture comes from. I forget the tailback's name, but
Chuck Mercy.
he wasn't signaling touchdown. He was signaling to the referee that he was not pushing Bart Starr. And so
Yeah.
it like context says that maybe they just go back to having that be the rule and doesn't break football anymore, etc. I also think that it's not an unstoppable play. I also like the Packers have had a pretty good success rate on it, like for context, but I also think it's not a trend in the NFL that is so toxic and permeating that it needs to be addressed. The reason that it works with the Eagles so well is they have such a good offensive line and they have a quarterback that can squat 600 pounds. Like, this just doesn't work with every team. And
Yeah.
so I don't really care either way with the context that I would rather they make sure that the formation is right when they run it because if they're going to be such sticklers about formation in other parts of offensive plays, like making sure the tackle is lined up hip deep with the guard and all that kind of stuff that we saw at a really high rate this past year, apply that same scrutiny to the tush push and then I'm fine with it. Just so that it's not literally unfair. I don't care about the play itself. I just want it officiated properly because eventually it'll end, right? And if you don't want them to do the tush push, don't let them get to 4th and inches. Don't let them get to 4th and 1. Like there's other ways to stop it just by being a better defense.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't. It all feels like a nothing thing. Let me gather my thoughts and like present this in a way where I show that I don't care, but also like there's so much conversation, and part of it is designed because the NFL kind of courts this dialogue and this rules legitimacy to like plays to what is a catch, what isn't a catch. And it's like at some point I would just like I don't care. I am not watching football to be like, well, by the letter of the law, this is this or this is that. Like those things obviously are going to come up when games are decided by calls that look a little shady or they're not. For as much as we bring in new technology, and there's part of the things that were approved was that they're getting rid of chains. They're going to an all what is it like all video board whatever.
I don't know what the name of it is, but essentially they're taking the chain gang away for the final call on first down markers and implementing a technology based thing system, which should have
Yeah,
been done forever ago. But I'll let you make your point, and then I know where you're going, and I have like a counterpoint to it as well.
I think part of it is like you see what the rules are supposed to be and you see how teams do it, whether it's by off the field trying to take advantage as much as they can, like salary cap wise or whatever. And then on the field, there's the element of like exploit the rules as much as you can in a legal way. And obviously, this is where a lot of the conversation about it. I don't have a definitive answer of whether this is a football player or whether it's not. I think honestly, it's subjective. I know Matt LaFleur was probably the most detailed in why he doesn't think it should be a play to begin with out of any like Packers official. I thought it was interesting to hear, but it's also like, I mean, is it the reason why the Eagles stomped on the Chiefs? No. Like I think they're using this when the Eagles are at their best and that they're going to be a team that's going to define the NFL. They have defined the NFL for the last decade, pretty
I'll
much.
even go a point further to say if it doesn't have a fancy name, it doesn't get the attention that it has gotten.
Exact. Yes. It immediately got like,
Casuals bit onto it because it has an easy, understandable name,
yeah.
which is like not punching down at casual fans, but like that's a
If you
if it hits mainstream media where like random people who don't watch sports know what it is, then it's eclipsed like
if it's something
NFL
that
fandom.
anybody could type into Google and for it to come up with football
Yeah,
plays rather than whatever other searches come up for that.
Jordan.
Sorry. I'm just saying, like, I think that is another point of like it was such an immediately recognizable, and of course, it's with a for a franchise that knows how to like name those things. Like it's part of their culture. They
Yeah,
they are now more emboldened by the fact that there is trying to be a faction of NFL people trying to get rid of it, which is the worst thing you could do for a Philadelphia sports franchise. I'm sorry, but
right.
I just think I don't know. I'm not here. Again, I'm not
It
in
ultimately
the
doesn't
weeds
like
of it.
matter so much. Like I think it's whatever.
It's whatever. It's something that talks about it, but it
Yeah.
does feel just so exhausting.
Yep.
Even when you hear from coaches like
Totally agree.
brilliant break, like Matt again, how Matt LaFleur explained it was totally understandable. It's
Hmm.
understandable for me, but it's like it doesn't matter. The Eagles are really good.
Right. Exactly. So, alrighty, let's enough about the tush push. Let's get into some more some more actual Packers football stuff. I'll start with Brian Gutekunst. Uh, he confirmed to the Packers media that Elton Jenkins will be going to center and that Aaron Banks will be starting at left guard, or not will be starting, but that's sort
Talk
of
about
the plan. Um, this is from the Athletics. Matt Schneeman, I'll never forget, remember how to pronounce his name. Quote,
doesn't matter. He's a Yankees fan.
that's right. Quote, and Ryan was a Mets fan. Quote, we feel he's got a
God,
chance to be an all pro center. We've talked about it a lot, how versatility plays into our offensive line and having guys that can move to different spots. And Elton's one of those guys who can play all five spots, so he's a luxury. But I'm excited to see what he can do at center as well. So that makes sense. I think us included maybe gave a little bit too much, too harsh of a grade to Elton Jenkins's start at center against Detroit last year when it was raining. But I think with a full off season and a camp to do so, he'll be just fine. Like I have confidence that he'll be able to do that. But I'm glad that like that's just confirmed. We don't not that there was going to be like speculation all summer kind of thing, but it's nice to know that it's like this is the plan going forward. I think it'll color a lot of what they do in the draft as well when it comes to like maybe if they do look at an offensive lineman, it probably won't be a center. It'll be a guard or a tackle.
in other words, Elton Jenkins Tush is getting pushed over to center, and Aaron Banks is playing at left
I
guard.
want you to seek Christ. That's what I gotta say about that.
Christian Welch is back.
Oh my God. I cannot believe you. I cannot believe you. Um, I promise, folks, we are not spending 10 minutes on Jair, but Brian
Yeah,
Gutekunst also had comments on
God.
Jair Alexander, which I am not proud of, but I think it gives credence to the situation in which I've talked about the entire offseason. This is from Brian Gutekunst, quote, we're working together on finding the best solution for everybody. quote, obviously we've invested a lot into Jair, and I want to make sure he's not going to be on a football team helping us win games, that we get something back for that investment. We'll see where it goes, but again, working with him weekly, we'll try to figure out what's best for Jair and the Packers, end quote. Ryan Wood also let off that Goody won't let Jair Alexander leave without anything in return. And so while he hasn't shut the door on Jair Alexander returning, uh, Ryan Wood added that it's unlikely that he would return, uh, and that the draft figures as a deadline to net a possible trade and get something in return. So all that being said, I think again it gives credence to what I've kind of been saying all summer or all winter, that
Off season.
off season, that they need a body there. They need people in the room, and they can't just cut Jair because their relationship is bad. So it's slim, but Goody sees it the same way, to where they need to get something back for him because they just have nothing in the cornerback room. So I'll be curious to see how this goes as the draft comes, and that's and Xavier McKinney worked out with him today. I don't know if you saw that, but
Yes, I
they
did.
were working out together, and Jair seemed in good spirits, smiling, having a good time. So that's that. I don't think we want to go any more on that, unless you have
No,
anything to say.
I think you
I'll give
want
you a minute to say what you have to say, because I don't want to spend 20 minutes on Jair.
I'm you know it's as exhausting as talking about the tush push.
Jair,
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm getting to that point.
yeah.
I think
I'm with you 100%. Like I wish to seek an end to the Jair discussion,
and there's really nothing new.
and it's nothing new. It's just one way or the other kind of thing. I'm with you there for sure. So, moving on, Brian Gutekunst believes the Packers have the pieces needed internally to improve their pass rush. According to Ryan Wood, quote, I think we can do everything. I think we can do everything we need to do from the players we have on the roster right now, because I think there's a significant amount of improvement from those guys, not only in year two of the scheme, but I think individually as well. We've invested in that area quite a bit already, and I'm excited to see the growth those guys will have. Um, I'll pause it there. I mean, yeah, they really need it, and I think this will color a lot of what they do for their draft. And to give some context to our draft prospects, we'll talk about in a little bit, in like of um the next couple of pods we're putting out. My apologies. We're doing offense this week, defense next week, and then the week of the draft we'll have the Talk of the Tundra mock draft out. But I think this comment in particular is going to really it's going to carry a lot of weight for me and how I perceive them in their draft moving forward. And so I think he might be a little tenuous to invest more in the line, and invest more in the edge with high draft picks, and or trading for Trey Hendrickson, for example, because they've already put so much into it. They have four first round picks on the line. Like they need to get the production up from them. And I think with the addition of, I forget his name. I just wrote it down in the article I'm writing about Brian Gutekunst. Their new defensive
The
line coordinator,
Demarcus
Demarcus Covington.
Covington
Yeah, with the addition
or
of Demarcus
Marcus
Covington.
Covington.
Yep, with the addition of Demarcus Covington to their line, I think the preferred way they see growth is through who they have with a new coach in the second year of Jeff Hafley's scheme. So this comment like doesn't surprise me per se, but it's like I think it's interesting in the context of wondering how the draft will play out when it does happen. Like
I
say,
agree.
seeing who they draft. Sorry to interrupt you. Sorry, seeing who they draft and if it fits contextually with this comment.
Yes, I agree. I also think is it are we necessarily going to wait on bated breath of whether the Packers draft a edge or defensive lineman high up with with a premium pick? No, because I think they ultimately are you know gonna rely on what their board is. To your point of like the projected you front and four for the Packers going into next year being all first round picks, and three of those being made under Gutekunst.
Right.
It's also like, well, they've had to do that because outside of Kenny Clark and
Half a season
the
Devontae Wyatt.
earliest years of Rashawn Gary,
That too. Yeah.
they've had to add more because it's not sorted.
It's not
Yeah, I
sorted.
mean, like
Right.
that's, and as we'll get to, I know you've written and people will see it as we work it out, but like,
If you're a GSPN premium subscriber on Substack.
um, but going into this draft season, I think now with so many picks under Goody's belt and kind of
72.
72 bridging different eras too, where it's
Mm-hmm.
like we kind of have a good track record of what they
What they value.
have gone for, what
Yep.
they value, and like his successes, what missed, and all that stuff. And it's like he dressed well. It's just not, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like it again, more to come on that front. But I just think it's like I understand his belief in the what they have internally, and
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely things to be intrigued by, but all the consistency issues really like until for Kenny Clark, not to just single him out, it was a bastion of like consistency until this year.
Right.
Like that, all the inconsistency issues could be talked about for every person on that line.
Yep. 100%. 100%. So, I do think in as we transition to his next comment that this kind of plays into that. This is Brian Gutekunst responding to his original urgency comments from the end of the season presser. This is to Matt Schneeman. Quote, I think the urgency comment is really more for our team, our organization to understand what the expectations are, Gutekunst said. At the same time, for us, I think we were very urgent in free agency. Obviously, we went after a couple of top targets. We were able to acquire them, and I think that is really going to help our football team. The urgency comment is across the board. I think it's for our players, organization, and how we are going to approach things. End quote. I I I, I'm not trying to rag on Goody. It feels a bit revisionist history to me. Like the the freshness of the loss to Philadelphia in his post game presser, I think, is how he really feels, and he's doing a bit of PR to recount that. Now that they, I'm not going to rag on him for calling Aaron Banks and Nate Hobbs top free agency targets, but even though I don't think they were, if the organization thought they were, they do. Like that's their prerogative. But at the same time, I really think he's kind of backpedaling a bit because I think his comments were appropriate at the end of the season. Like they do need a wide receiver one. They need Jaden Reed to focus on catching the ball more. They need Dontayvion Wicks to focus on catching the ball more. They need their players to step up and show development. That hasn't changed in the 2 months that we haven't played football. The what
No,
All that's changed is that they've gotten further away from the season and they've evaluated their team a little better or a little more to see what's going on. And I think both can be true. They can still need to be steadfast and have a sense of urgency in the competing timeline. But they also can understand that they needed to make changes to the defensive line coaching staff and they needed to talk to these guys to get more out of them.
two things that'll two sidetrack notes I wanted to make and I forgot to make until now.
Okay.
If you watch the video of this on Packers.com or their Packers YouTube channel, you will notice Brian Gutekunst is wearing a vest, even though these meetings are being held in West Palm Beach, Florida. It's a
It's still April. It's like
I understand,
65
but I
down
was
there.
like, you can take the man out of Green Bay, but you can't take the Green Bay out of the man. You know what I mean?
Okay, go ahead.
And then if you read Matt Stevens' article, there's a section about the scouting reports and of like the free agency targets that they brought in, like Nate Hobbs and Aaron Banks and Nicole Hardman. And when it comes to Aaron Banks, Brady Coon's answer starts with the phrase, obviously a really large man.
Hot take.
He's a top target and he was a large man.
Yeah.
Um, no, I think you're spot on of like that is their prerogative to frame it as these are our top
Top
targets.
targets. Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think both things can be true. I think cooler heads have prevailed, obviously, and you kind of have to turn the page. But everything that Brady Gudikun said at the end of that press conference, because I transcribed a lot of it, was in the moment, frustration, and a sense of disappointment. Those are still all there.
Yeah.
It's still all there. And I understand like you're on to the new year, there are new challenges, you're weeks away from a draft that your team is hosting, the year of the host city. Yada yada yada. Like there's a lot of things going on. But and also side note, one of your best players on the team theoretically is may or may not be on the team. That's a dangling a dangling Chad, if you will, because they are in Florida.
A
Um,
hanging Chad.
Hanging Chad, dangling Chad. I knew that was good. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Damn it, dangling Chad actually sounds better. That's a sequel. Hopefully, we don't have to live that. I, I just think it's like, yeah, it all applies. Like, it's the reason why it's gonna be really hard to try to leapfrog back into the top to win the division, to get the talent that you need, and maybe this is a good draft class that pays immediate dividends, but it's like it's only getting harder. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you have to block out what other teams are doing to a certain degree, but it's like no one in the divisions say is making a concerted effort to say we'll try to win the division 2028. They're
Yeah.
trying to win the division
Vision now.
2025.
Yeah. Totally agree. Uh, three more comments from him. He believes that Christian Watson will most likely miss the first half of the 2025 season as he recovers from his ACL injury. We kind of expected that. Nothing really more to comment on there. Uh, Jordan Morgan will get a shot at left tackle going to start at camp, Matt Schneeman reported. That's
Guten Morgen.
surprising to me, honestly. Um, and then Goody feels McCole Hardman is the next return specialist from them, succeeding Keyshawn Nixon and Jaden Reed should he make the team. Um, I guess I'm gonna put a brief pin in the Jordan Morgan comment as we talk about Matt LaFleur, and then we'll come back to it as soon as we start uh, comments on the draft prospects. So hold on, probably like 3 minutes. um, no, 2 minutes because we only have two things on Matt LaFleur. Um, he talked about giving up play calling duties, and he said this to Ryan Wood. Quote, if I thought it was going to help our football team, I would 100% do that. I just don't know if that's the route we want to go right now. I mean, I'm fine with him keeping play calling. Like, I think it's for the most part okay. I think it's become a little like stale, I think is the best way to call it. It looks like a lot of the same stuff he runs every year, but I don't think that's a play calling issue. I think that's a playbook issue. So I think hopefully he addresses that in the offseason and they start to implement some more varied looks for their personnel.
It was very interesting. This article this quote came from. It was the kind of call and response, if you will, to the urgency comments that Goody mentioned, and I think Ryan Webb was going for the coach's perspective and Matt LaFleur's perspective of like, what would you change if it meant that you get better results, if it meant the Packers once they get to the postseason they win games, they advance to the conference championship, they go to the Super Bowl, and all of this stuff, and that's where the uh, idea of play calling and giving up if it meant having a better handle on kind of the Nick Sirianni way of coaching.
Right.
Best described as him kind of being the CEO of coaches rather than when that was instituted this time last offseason. It was very much like the Eagles build out his staff and he kind of makes sure the houses are in order. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Um, I just think, yeah, this is what year seven, season seven for Matt LaFleur going into. I I don't see enough of a problem for it to be a thing.
Yeah,
You know what I
I
mean?
totally agree with you. Totally agree with you.
Like I think those are questions that Ryan Wood, Matt Schneeman, name any beat reporter has to ask because you're the voice of the fan, you're in that room, you have the access to ask those questions, so it has to become a thing. But nothing to my even when things were looking bad in 2023 when they're 2-5 and it was a young team trying to overcome mistakes and mental errors. It's like ultimately like why if you make any panic moves to abandon how your coaching structure was, I think that would look badly on the people that made that move in the first place.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. So let's get back to Jordan Morgan, and as a segue into the draft prospects, Matt LaFleur confirmed what he had said, or Matt LaFleur confirmed what Brian Gutekunst had said, that Jordan Morgan will have a shot at starting at left tackle. I'm
It's a
frankly
Morgan.
surprised at that they're willing to be so public about that. I think I wouldn't have been surprised at all had they said he would have a chance to compete for a starting spot at right guard, where he played last year. But with as well as Rasheed Walker has played, and with how well Rasheed Walker has played for the money he's getting paid as a former seventh round pick, I'm very surprised that they've kind of been like, yeah, Jordan Morgan, go win it if you want. It's like from a team building standpoint, I'm curious as to why they just wouldn't let Morgan slot in at right guard where Sean Ryan plays and have him compete for a spot there versus trying to beat up Rasheed Walker, who's played admittedly pretty well. Because at that point, if Jordan Morgan does win the spot at left tackle, then you have a left tackle riding the bench that doesn't really doing much, right? Like he's a depth piece, sure, that's great. You ultimately don't want to have to use him as a depth piece, like if everyone stays healthy, kind of thing. And and I can't imagine they trade him because he's a if someone goes down, he's a great backup to have. It's the Malik Willis idea of quarterback. Like Malik Willis has value in the league as a quarterback to start or a backup. Packers have him right now and it's going great. He's an asset to the team. I talked with this in our Discord. I would need like a second or third from Malik Willis to be comfortable moving off of him, for the sole purpose of Malik Willis won 2 games last year, and so no 3 games last year. He's an asset to have with Jordan Love's health. Same thing goes for Rasheed Walker. Rasheed Walker could net you a pretty penny as a starting left tackle in the league because he's going to get paid next year when he's a free agent. And if they trade him to like the Patriots, for example, who need someone to protect Drake May's blindside, they trade him to the Texans, who just traded away Laramie Tunsil, or any team that needs a good left tackle, not even a great left tackle, just a good one. That player has value. But I don't think the Packers are trading Rasheed Walker before camp. And so
No, yeah,
I'm just curious at the way that they're trying to form this line. And and it's fascinating to me because they want their 5 best linemen, as you do always, and that's how they've built this line, is that they want 5 linemen that can play across the line, or at least 4, because like Aaron Banks has been playing left guard for a long time, and like Zach Tom has time at center, he has time at right tackle, like he can kind of play anywhere. Same thing with Elton Jenkins, same thing with Jordan Morgan now. They do that, but then if you're trying to shoehorn Jordan Morgan to left tackle to for whatever reason to justify the first round pick, if that's his best spot, if they think he can play tackle, even though they played him at guard last year. I'm just curious as to how this is all going to come together because if that's the case, I think I'd rather trade Rasheed Walker for a second or third round pick between now and the beginning of the season than let him ride the bench. You know what I mean? Like if Jordan Morgan gets hurt and is out for an extended period of time, I'd rather shift what they have along the line than just to have Rasheed Walker waiting in the wings, especially because he's going to be a free agent and they're not going to give him a contract anyways. It's because they drafted Jordan Morgan. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it ultimately comes down to, and you made not you didn't allude to it, you said it. It's like one, you have to assert what do you have in Jordan Morgan? Is his versatility an asset? Is he this tweener, like interior lineman, left tackle, kind of all purpose guy? Is that an asset? To some degree, having someone that can play multiple positions makes sense. I mean, they have a guy, Ellen Jenkins is doing that right now. Um, Zach Tom theoretically can move around too, even though he's pretty much locked down at right tackle.
Yeah, he's not moving from right tackle.
You ultimately just want to see what you have in Jordan Morgan, and based on how the whole idea is to get good as many good players that breeds competition that no one's spot except for a precious few is locked down. You know what I mean? Like the Packers have paid handsomely to the key spots on rosters, but outside of that, guys can get moved around. They've done rotations with offensive linemen specifically. Jordan Morgan be in that scenario last year in the limited playing time that he had last year. Like I just think it's gonna evolve. It's not gonna be set in stone. I think the fact that they are not committing to him as being he's the starting left tackle going into next season is notable itself. It's I think there's part of it is the contingency plan, but it's also just like we want to see him succeed. We want to see him. We don't want it to be going into year three, and we're still asking the question of what is Jordan Morgan and what is his best position? Because
Exactly.
that's
I
you
understand
can't,
needing to find that out as well. It's a fascinating thought experiment to go through.
and it's not. And I think to your point is that the Packers, and we've seen it. I guess we more so saw it last year with John Renning rather than this year with Josh Myers. But when you're a Packers, if you're an offensive lineman for the Packers and you hit free agency, you are usually going to get a big money deal because it kind of just carries the weight of like, well,
Right.
they know what they're doing with their offensive line.
Right.
They draft well. They develop guys enough that are hit kind of Pro Bowl, All Pro status, or play on the see out their rookie contract that are really good guys. That when it comes time to free agency, it's a pretty penny to retain them, or they go elsewhere to get top dollar. And now they're kind of in this influx, not influx, but it's not. They're trying to dip their toe into free agency while still keeping the fact that they want to be known as like this drafting and developing team. But when you pay a big money deal to Aaron Banks and he has a pretty fixed position, that takes away a spot for Jordan Morgan to theoretically play.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's an interior lineman, that would obviously bounce him into right guard, who Sean Ryan,
Did well
when he
last year.
got and he was again, he wasn't a first round pick, but he was a third round pick. And his rookie season, he had a suspended for PEDs, didn't play as much in the second season. And we were going into last year asking, well, what is Sean Ryan? And turned out to be a lot better than what we thought, and was productive.
Mm-hmm.
But as much as we can get those answers later into these contracts, it's like, well, now he's a free agent next year.
Right.
It's like it is just the roster churn and the inevitable wheel keeps spinning
Yep.
in roster building, but ultimately, when it comes to your first round pick that you were high on enough to take him, you just want to see him play at a position that you thought he was going to play from the get go, and that kind of changed his rookie year.
Right. And to transition this into our next topic, which is scouting these guys on offense for the draft this year. I only looked at receivers, Jordan. and I told you this, and I think for players on offense, I will be aghast if they take any other offensive position in the first 3 rounds that isn't receiver, because
Yeah.
they don't need a quarterback, they don't need more running backs, they don't need more tight ends, and they don't need more offensive linemen. Like they don't need to invest money in any of the or draft picks in those places because of how they built their team through the draft and through free agency the last few years. Like they picked Marshawn Lloyd last year as a third or fourth round pick, and like they Matt LaFleur said in his comments in Florida that they're excited to see more about him. That's fine. Emmanuel Wilson is good. He'll be in the mix too. They still have Josh Jacobs, like he's good too. They still have Chris Brooks, who was good last year. Like they have enough running backs. Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft are set at tight end. Like they'll bring in a third guy to be a blocker tight end and a depth guy, but they don't need to invest a draft pick there. And then the conversation we just had about Lyman, and so as we get to talking about these, and we'll talk about our first guy in just a moment, I'll be like I said shocked if they take anybody that isn't a receiver on offense in the first 100 picks because they just don't need it. And best player available be damned. They have bigger holes at other places that they don't need to invest more in those four positions specific or those four groups specifically: QB, running back, tight end, lineman on offense, I should say. So as we enter into these offensive
Transition.
into these offensive draft prospects. That's my context. The next seven or so players we're going to talk about, or whoever we decide to talk about here, for me, they're all receivers. So, um, I'm going to start, if that's okay, Jordan, and
Yeah.
we can talk about them. I think we'll probably give two for each round, if that sounds good to you. Um, the guy that I'm looking at, if all receivers in that 20s area are set. To give context, I didn't look much into Tet McMillan. I like Tet McMillan out of Arizona a lot. And I know Gudu's at his pro day. I'd be shocked if they traded up to get him. And we can talk about that once you and I give our first round picks here in a sec. We'll talk about that the Tet idea after these next two. But for me, I'm going the guy I know, and it's Emeka Egbuka out of Ohio State. 6'1", he ran a 4.48 dash, and at the combine, he has a 38-inch vertical, um, good arm length, and has a pretty solid catch radius as well. The issue, and this will be a common theme that we'll end with in my concerns with at the end. The quote unquote issue that he has is a primary slot receiver. He took a lot of snaps in the slot in college. Has good hands. Had 5 drops in 2022, 2 in 2023, and 5 in 2024. Um, he did a lot of his work between 0 and 20 yards. Like his route tree is a little, I guess, simple is how I'll call it. PFF has a wonderful resource if you guys are subscribed for their draft book, and it gives you all of his route, all of everybody's the receivers route data for um, basically their big board guys they see being drafted, and it gives you all their route tree essentially. He had double digit targets and only on 3 routes, which are crossings, which are just like short slants, hitches, which are comebacks to the inside towards the ball, and then out routes, which is just a right angle route out towards the sideline. He had 17, 16, and 16 targets on those. His next highest that isn't those three is a speed out, which is just a really short route to the flat, and he had 9 there. And so he really had like three route trees that he ran. He ran a lot of other routes too. But I would have liked to see him with the volume that he had. He had, if I can find the number quick, he had 106 targets, and so he had almost 60% of his targets come from 3 routes, which is just like his creature of comfort per se. But
Yeah.
Emeka Egbuka has been talked about as a draft as a NFL prospect for like years, right? He was, I forget who it was 3 years ago because it was Marvin Harrison last year, and I forget who the oh it was
Marvin
Gar-
Harrison last year, JSN the year
before
before,
that, and then Garrett Wilson was too long ago, but it was before no it
no,
was
that would
no it was JSN.
it was
No,
Garrett Wilson.
it was JSN because JSN was 3 years ago, and that was his first year playing. I'm pretty sure. Regardless, a lot of the ideas behind Emeka Egbuka has been like pretty much voter fatigue, right? Like they've been going to see these other guys, Marvin Harrison Jr., the Jeremiah Smith, who's going to be really good when he comes out of the draft in a couple of years. JSN, Garrett Wilson, all these guys. And Mika Egbuka has been putting in work with Ohio State dog. Like he's been doing pretty darn good as a receiver in that program. Like I arguably wide receiver you between them and LSU. And I would love an Ohio State wide receiver on my team. He's just he looks really good. He played against a lot of soft coverage, which means he was able to like get off his breaks really easy. But he knows his routes very well, and a thing that I value a lot, that if you guys remember me talking about last year and the discussions with Alan Lazard, and there's a couple other receivers too that have this trait. His routes have purpose. He doesn't round them off, and that's what I think is indicative like of a focus of a good wide receiver. Um, he did a lot of backfield work, as I mentioned, with those crossings or the speed out routes. Those are basically backfield things or running through the backfield. Like if they want someone to be replacing Christian Watson this year, they use Christian Watson a lot in that role, and Emeka Ibuka has experience doing that. Um, I mean, the biggest thing, just a talented player, and that I think they just need talent in that room, and he is that for me.
I would agree. I think he is clearly the second best receiver in this class behind McMillan.
Ted McMillan, yeah, it depends on how
I
you rate the rest of these guys. It's an interesting conversation.
I think too. I think Egbuka probably brings all of these qualities that the Packers, when you're talking about their number one wide receiver, I think he kind of fits the bill. But there's shades of like you mentioned, like Alan Lazard, or like even probably some current wide receivers like Romeo Dobbs or Jaden Reed or Christian Watson when healthy and productive. It's like being able to do the technical work, good work ethic, has the speed, athleticism, good hands, all the everything that you want in like that total package. But it's also like we know how big it is. It's what made Alan Lazard into you know I don't think he got signed by anybody, but still like
No,
someone
he did
that
not.
was a practice squad guy in 2019. Packers picked him up and had at least he was a
He had a
good
successful
first couple
career.
years,
He had a successful
successful
career.
career from a very low position. And it's like if you embrace doing the little things and you're a good run blocker and you're a big body that
Yeah.
knows how to do those things, that's just like it's not just extra credit.
Yep.
You're winning like snaps. Yeah, I mean you're doing the thing to get what makes you get paid.
Yeah, and I like Egbuka is a good run blocker as well. I'd say he's like good, and that's like to meant to be taken sincerely. He's not great, like prime Alan Lazard was. He's not really bad either. He's
I
a
love that you just said prime Alan Lazard.
well, that was his calling card, right?
I understand. I know. It's
But
just so
like
funny.
I understand that it's funny, but like that's what he was kind of that's how he got his snaps was that he was being a
Yeah,
good run blocker, and so I think like
not
he
everybody's Chase Claypool or George Pickens,
fighting their blockers, but like
or not even giving a crap about them, like in Chase Claypool's case.
right. And so I think like that's like if you can be serviceable, the team will ask you to do more if you need to do more. And like PFF, his quote unquote weakness was can just be inconsistent as a blocker. And so like sure, if if the inconsistent part is for just the college system, sure. But I think at the NFL level, he's a pro that'll take that to the next level. I just noticed this to his player comp from PFF is Amon-Ra St. Brown. Give me an Amon-Ra St. Brown. Obviously, those comps always kind of vary a bit. There's a guy later that I like that they comped as Alec Pierce, and I was like, that's just ridiculous. But just for the 2 cents per se. So, um, do you have anything else on Igbuka, or do you want to talk about your choice?
Well, I think Egbuka I'm the most impressed with that I think is available.
Yeah,
And there are things like, to be honest, I could easily probably talk myself into a few of the first round kind of draft grade guys or guys that are thought of to go in the first round. But it's still like there's a nagging pinging going on in my head, and not just because I'm brain dead, but knowing that this wide receiver class coming out of last year, and the Packers didn't take a wide receiver at all last year, right? I'm not
no, they
crazy.
haven't, or didn't
So
rather.
coming out of last year's wide receiver class that we thought or that was expected to be really strong going into the draft, and knowing that the Packers are probably the most set at wide receiver, they don't go after anything, and we're kind of back to the point where it's like, well, who's their number one? Who can they get someone that if it's not a one, is it a 1.5? Is it kind of the does it just lift, all tides or high tides lift all boats, whatever kind of thing. I don't know if I could fall in love with to the point of like a couple years ago when we were doing our first draft stuff and be like JSN is the guy.
Right,
If you're looking for a post Devontae option and Christian Watson, that was the best of his time. It's like they still need something. This is the guy to go after. And they obviously didn't do that. And they come away with Jaden Reed, who you probably argue is the most consistent of their wideouts, but anybody can make an opinion on what that is. I know exactly. That face
yeah,
is says it all. So I just think there's a lot of like Matthew Golden, for example. Super fast. Ran a
tough,
4.29 at the combine.
faster than Christian Watson.
Faster than Chris Watson. And there are things when I watch how he plays and it he's interesting enough where he's not super big, brings a lot of speed, can make highlight worthy plays.
Mm-hmm.
But is that like, dude, do they need that? Do they just need it? Like, what do they
Right,
ultimately need? They need all these they need a little bit of everything, which would make for like a number one wide receiver, but that doesn't exist in
right,
this draft class. At least, more importantly, at the spot that the Packers are at. So I'm just like, I get pulled in all these different directions of like, what does that look like? And I think, to your point, I think Egbuka best resembles all those qualities.
mm-hmm.
But if he's off the board, it's like I'm looking at Matthew Golden, I'm looking at Luther Burden, and these guys have interesting things about them, but it's like not sold.
Right. So I guess let's talk about Matthew Golden. Right, he's the other.
Yeah,
We can talk about Luther Burden the third and Matthew Golden together because they're kind of, I don't want to say the same receiver, but they share a similar detriment that makes me wonder if they're worth drafting for the Packers. Let's start with Luther Burden Jr. Wow, Luther Burden the third, wide receiver out of Missouri. He's 5'11". He was 6 feet at the combine, but the Missoula spent 5'11", so he's about that size, 206 pounds. Uh, his route tree at Mizzou is very limited. He didn't run a lot of stuff.
yep,
Excuse me while I scroll just a tiny bit. If like the same thing that Egbuka had, where he had a couple of route trees or routes that he ran a lot. Um, Matthew Gold only had two over like two in double digits with that in double digits. My apologies, and that was a hitch route and an out route. Like that's it. His next highest is 8 on slants. Other than that, it was pretty sparse between. And so he's like doesn't have the most experience running a variety of routes as to where some of these other guys do. Um, he was with, I believe, Houston the last two, yeah, in 2022 and 2023. In 2022, he had 7 touchdowns on 38 catches and 584 yards. A bit of a down year after missing a couple of games in 2023. In 2024, with the Texas Longhorns as they go to the national semifinal, 16 games, 58 catches on 83 targets, 987 yards, and 9 touchdowns. He primarily plays outside, even though he is only 5'11.
Yeah.
Uh, he's really good deep. His average depth of target deep is 32 yards, and his average depth of target in the middle is 13 yards. Like he gets downfield quick. The part of the issue too is that he doesn't have the greatest yards after catch, only 195 this year. But you look at his tape, and my God, does he jump off the screen? His footwork is really really good. I call it stupendous in my notes. um, and his release package is really good too. It's a lot of like one step and I'm by you, and then 438 total deep yards. But the issue that comes up with um, oh, I'm sorry. I just transferred from Luther Burden to Matthew Golden. I I
I kind
did I
of I
transition
knew
right?
it's
My apologies. I didn't
I thought you
finish.
said Matthew Golden.
Okay. No, no, I started with Luther Burden. All the stats I just gave you were Matthew Golden's. My apologies. I'll get to Luther Burden in a second. My apologies. I got ahead of myself. Um, so talking about Matthew Golden, the issue I have is that again he's only 5'11 and they don't have a really tall receiver to go do that. The way I could see this working out is if the Packers believe that Dontavian Wicks can develop into their X receiver, their wide receiver, their boundary receiver, I could see them taking Matthew Golden because he's really talented and he's got like just a lot of the stuff that just jumps off the screen. Another
Yeah.
really athletic guy. He had an RES score. Never mind, they didn't give me one because he didn't jump at the combine, but ran a 4.29 at the combine. Like he's just he just looks really good on tape, and so if you think that Wicks can develop into a wide receiver one and be that boundary receiver for them, then you either have Reed or Golden play inside or as a wide receiver two. Then I could see it working. But then the same issue goes with Luther Burden, who I began talking about with then skipped over because I don't really care for him as a prospect. His route tree again, as I mentioned earlier, extremely limited, and he did a lot of work out of the backfield and but was really prone to drops too. Like really prone
Yeah.
to it. And what I noticed in looking at his tape and sort of reading some analysis, his skill set almost exactly mirrors Jaden Reed's to where it would almost be duplicative to have them both on the team because they have the same issues. They have like they're essentially the same size. They kind of ran the same 40. Like they're just kind of the same player. I don't really see the idea with Luther Burden. I think he's going to be a fine pro, but if you can't take Emeka Egbuka at 23 and you're set on drafting a receiver, which I think they should be, I don't think Luther Burden is the answer. Like I kind of just stopped looking at him after I noticed what I noticed. And but now it's like I can talk myself into Matthew Golden so long as Wicks keeps developing. And I think that's where I'm intrigued with those two. Like if they're coming out of the first round with either Golden or Ibuka, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think your point of Wicks, I mean, plenty to talk about with Wicks, and he's kind of the when Christian Watson is hurt, Wicks stands in as the ultimate feast or famine guy
Mm-hmm.
because his drops are so much of a problem
Yeah.
to whatever next steps he takes in his career. This is just I have the ick because it's like there's so much
I
I
want you to hold on what your ick is because
okay.
at the end I want to recap where the Packers fall in the draft and all this and where these guys are mocked to go. And your ick will play into that discussion well.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like I don't want you to give me your ick yet
Yeah.
because we should talk about all of the guys before we kind of talk about the process here. So, um, any guys that you want to talk about between the guys you told me you watched that you were impressed with that you in this
Beyond first round,
yes. Moving on to the second round.
I would say Ao Manor from Stanford.
Yep.
Uh
Alec Ao Manor.
is it Alec or Alec?
Alec.
Because it's an E.
Yeah, it's an E. It's Alec.
Okay. Just making sure.
Yep.
I find him the most intriguing. I think one, he's just kind of like this weird. He has a very interesting body type. Like he's like thick, like a fire hydrant, like in a way. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah. He's
A lot of his,
he's 6'1", 206.
but super athletic, super fast.
He's
Like
dense.
yes, dense,
he ran a 4.44 and did 15 reps on the bench.
late bloomer to football. Like he played hockey. He grew up in Canada. He played hockey. Just very interesting background athletically, or in his pursuit to
Yeah.
become a professional
From
athlete.
Medicine Hat, Canada.
Hey there. Sorry for the tariffs. But um but um he just popped in a very real that he kind of typified the dirty work kind of guy of like one, he's just really big as a blocker and really gets into it and has enough juice there that I wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily peg him as like a slow body or like a slow big bodied receiver. I think he kind of checks a lot of boxes like physically, athletically,
He's a really good blocker.
and I like what he is deeper into this draft without
Yep.
giving away too much of like big picture thoughts. But he of the post first round guys or generally mocked first round guys was the most intriguing to me and kind of the most palpably eye catching
Yep.
to me.
He's an X receiver, like through and through. He's an
Yeah.
outside boundary guy. He only took um 62 snaps in the slot this year, 68 in the slot last year, over 400 out wide in the last 2 years. Otherwise, he he has um very interesting like he's interesting. He's fast, right? He ran a 4.44, I believe is what I said earlier. Yeah, he ran a 4.44. If you watch his tape, it takes him a while to get there, and
Yeah, he's
which is why we'll talk about it. That none of these prospects are perfect. I think this is like his not perfect thing, is that his 40-yard dash. Like if you've ever used the relative athletic score, like Portal, you know like what they look like, and that green is good, yellow is average, red is bad. He's green in his 20-yard split and his 40-yard time. His 10-yard split is average, and it's just like it was 1.56 seconds to get from the start to the 10-yard line. And if you watch his tape, it really looks like it. He's
yeah.
really slow getting off the ball. Really slow is hyperbolic, but you understand what I'm trying to say. But and it looks like sometimes he's just getting getting in mud, trying to get off the line. His releases from his route aren't the prettiest. They're kind of just they just happen. And so like he looks good on tape, but he's not super duper athletic. And I mean, he had good stats. He had almost identical stats in his years with Stanford. He had 63 catches in 12 games both years on 107 and 109 targets. The difference being he had 1,000 yards last year and 831 this year, then 6 CDs in both. But he can track the ball really well in the air. He made some good plays. It's just like I just don't know if he is capable of getting off of his releases and getting off of his coverage and press with being that slow and not having the release package that like someone elite like Devontae Adams is. Like Devontae Adams is an elite receiver. It's hard to aspire to be him. But when you see a guy like Devontae at his size with that release package, that's what makes him great and be
Yeah.
able to get by guys in press. Alec Aomanor doesn't really have that, and I think that's like I'm hesitant on him, even though he is a true X. I think he'd be good with the Packers, and I think he's a good player to strive for. It's just a very curious player. It's incredibly curious. Like his again PFF grades, huge grain of salt. It's college. It's even a bigger grain of salt. But his receiving grade versus single coverage was an 11. That's not good. It's not good. And
No.
so, and then his separation percentage versus single coverage is 37. Again, not good. For context, if I can scroll down to Emeka Egbuka here quickly to give you his his stats on that. Receiving grade versus single coverage for Emeka Egbuka 76th. His separation percent in single coverage is 89. Like two really good numbers for a talented receiver, and why he's probably being mocked higher than Alec Manor. But same thing with the route tree with with A.O. Manor. It's a crazy number. The routes he ran the most of were hitches, which are just like comeback routes inside towards the ball, as I mentioned earlier. He ran that route 34 times for targets. His next highest is our go routes at 13 times he was targeted on those routes. Like it's not very diverse, which is fine, but it's like he had 224 yards on on that stuff, and I think a lot of that is the product of just of Stanford's offense. Just watching it, like they weren't very good the last couple of years, and
Yes.
to the point, like he had 3 touchdowns on these routes. The 3 touchdowns were on corner routes, which he had 6 targets on. Like none of it really matters there, kind of thing. So it's just interesting, and I'm with you. Like I in that next tier, I like him as an X because he has the size. I just wonder, can he get off the ball? Hilariously, his comp player is James Jones, which like, and if we're taking it that way, James Jones solidly a wide receiver 2 or 3 his entire career. That's not what they need. Like they have that in Romeo Dobbs. They just don't need a guy like that. And that's again, we're getting there, Jordan. We're getting to the end of this pod eventually, to where all this comes into play for my my thoughts on the wide receivers this class.
Who would you say is your,
My second
I
round
guess,
guy,
let's say day two.
2 or 3. Well,
There's a lot more than first round, obviously.
right. I'm gonna give my second round pick because there's 2 other guys I want to talk about because I mentioned them in my article earlier this year. But the next guy I think I'm good with that I like, I think that I would really prefer they get if they don't take a receiver in the first round, is Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State. Jaden Higgins has become a draft darling. I'd be surprised if he gets the second round. Like I think he's a pretty significant riser. Uh he's 6'4", has a 58% contested catch rate. He ran a 4.47 40. Um, had a vertical jump of 39 inches, which was elite according to RAS, and a broad jump of 10 feet, which is crazy. Like just an insanely talented player. And the biggest thing for me on this, the biggest thing in college, he was targeted 351 times. He had 7 drops. That's an insane number, Jordan. That's
That
an
is insane.
that's insane. And coming out of this year where we saw 2 Packers have top 10 drops, I need a guy that can just catch the damn ball. And Jaden Higgins is that. He's versatile. He ran a lot of different routes um, in college at Iowa State. But excuse my scroll again as I can give you I can give you some of the numbers. But he a lot of the percentages he graded out too, like his separation percentage versus single coverage was graded at 61. Receiving grade is a 91. Receiving grade versus zone coverage is 96. But a lot of he has four double digit routes. He had two touchdowns, seven catches on 19 targets for 204 yards. Hitches were another big one for him. 27 catches on 33 targets. And then he had two touchdowns on slant routes from 13 catches on 17 targets. So just a talented, talented receiver. And he's really fast off the line. He does change of direction really good. His tape plants his foot in the ground. Not no rounding off of routes. Every cut means something to Jaden Higgins, which again I very much appreciate. The only thing that I think I struggle with is he's not the strongest. He creates separation with his hands a lot, like a lot of OPIs that
Mm.
weren't called. You watch his draft profile and all the highlights that these people put together for their players, and you watch and we're like, wait a minute, that was OPI. Hold on, that was OPI. that
Oh,
there's another one. Um, and so he doesn't win deep very often. Like he doesn't create separation a whole lot deep, but he's still able to go catch the ball because he is just so big. And so yeah, like Jaden Higgins would be my preference there in the second round if he makes it to the Packers at 58 or
or
54. Yeah,
right.
I'm looking.
Nah,
Um,
darn it.
54. Yep, you're right. So other guys that I want to talk about, frankly, Trey Harris. I wrote about him.
Yes. Yep.
I wrote about him when I wrote the Devontae article and how the Packers should approach wide receiver one. I mean, I like him a lot. 6'2", 38.5-inch vertical. Not the fastest guy, ran a 4.54 40. Uh, Again, another primary X receiver, a 61.5 contested catch rate. He had some injury history, which makes me nervous, frankly. He only played 8 games in 2024, and some of the guys that I watched talked about how he would just like come back and he'd get hurt, leave a game, come back. So I don't know how durable he is. He's real strong. He has a huge catch radius and is not and holds on to the ball. Also from Ole Miss, which is a good trait to have. He DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, both receivers coming out of Ole Miss that are really good. Uh, his tape, nothing elite, and I think Peter Bukowski had a tweet about this today that was some good context for Trey Harris. A lot of his production this year came against non D1 schools or like non Power 5 schools, which is important to understand that like the box scores can't all be trusted. They're not all created equal. But there's a clip of him scoring a touchdown against LSU. Holy moly, did he make the cornerback look silly? He catches the ball in the flat on a little screen and puts his foot in the ground, and you know the gif. This is for Bucks fans too. You know the gift of Jordan Mora when he put the step back on that
Oh,
guy and he's falling back like this.
his shining moment as
His
a Bucks
his
player.
shining NBA career moment. He had the LSU
Oh,
DB looking like that. It was an insane change of direction move. And so like I'm just another talented guy like that. And again, 6'2", not the biggest guy. He's not 6'4", he's not 6'5", but he can still be a good player. I just worry about his durability, but he's a guy that I would like to see the Packers draft again if he's there and the rest of these guys are gone. Like I'd be happy if they got him per se. I know you liked him too when we were talking about him.
yes. I think statistically there's intriguing qualities, but I think when you watch him, it's like I can see how this leads into being maybe not a wide receiver one, but something that the Packers could use as a useful tool and add more to their, you know, collection.
Yeah, exactly. The last guy that I looked at that I'd be okay with them getting is Pat Bryant. Excuse me, out of Illinois, 6'2", 37.5-inch vertical. Another guy that I don't think that this is a guy I don't think the Packers draft solely because he doesn't fit their RES score. Um, he's relatively slow, 4'6", 40. He jumps out of the gym though, had a 37.5-inch vertical. He's just a relatively slow player. Um, and I think his main trait is just that he is an X receiver.
Yeah.
I just need them to get a guy outside, and so he's a guy that I wouldn't want them to draft in the second, but like if he somehow falls to them in the third and they haven't taken receiver yet, like I'd be okay with them taking Pat Bryant versus if the rest of these guys are gone. So there's other players here or like in the draft that they could possibly scoop up like a Torrey Horton out of Colorado State um who I've seen clips of and could be fine. Uh I don't really like Tez Johnson. He's too small, 5'10". They just I don't want them drafting another short guy. Um, Jalen Royals out of Utah State, another guy that they could get. Not big on Xavier Restrepo out of Miami. He's short, and I think he could be a fine receiver. I just not a guy I want them to spend a draft pick on. And so my 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 issue with all of this now is that the top ends of receivers here don't fit what they need. You kind of touched on this already. That there isn't a true X that they could like realistically attain that is exactly what they need. I think Emeka Egbuka is the closest to that. I think he's the guy I'm going to end up wanting him to draft. But I was telling Jordan this so far on offense, I don't have a guy that I've fallen in love with like I did with JSN, like I did with Brian Branch, like I did with um oh my god.
There was a whiteout that we were looking at last year. Or no, we were more looking at edge rushers for first round.
No, last year I was looking at Cooper DeJean and Quinton Mitchell and those
Oh,
fellas.
duh.
Um no, it was only JSN, it was Brian Branch, it was um Darnell Washington was another one, the tight end in the second or third round. Um I'm missing one because JSN was year one, or Brian Branch. Year two would have been the Lucas.
Cooper DeJean.
Nope, that was last year. Lucas Van.
There's only been two.
There's been
We've
three.
only
We've had three. This
no
is our fourth. We're going into our fourth season.
fourth season, third draft.
Right. So the first year was JSN or Brian Branch.
And that was 23.
That was 22, Jordan.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it
That was
was.
23.
I could have swore we've done three. I'm
Because JSN was the Lucas Van Ness draft.
No, he wasn't. He was 2022. I promise.
I promise.
Jordan. Jackson Smith Njigba was drafted in 2023.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Then who was
You said
2022? Why am I
we didn't
blanking
have
here?
we didn't have a podcast.
It all runs. Holy moly! I'm sorry for being so assertive. I thought that was 3 years ago. Oh my god! It is 3 years ago. This is our third draft. So it was JSN and
6 days,
and
seven
Brian.
nights, starring Harrison Ford.
That's right. It was Brian Branch and JSN in 2023. Last year it was Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean and others, Terry and Arnold kind of guy people. This year I just don't have that. Like
Yeah.
Emeka Egbuka I think is gonna be the guy I talk myself into, and I'd be thrilled to get him. And maybe I find like maybe I really like Derek Harmon next week when we look at defensive linemen. But
Harrison, yeah.
there's defensive players that are talented there. But the issue that this all comes around to now is that where these guys fall in the draft is not conducive for the Packers picking where they are. And Mika Egbuka is the closest to where I think they'll be able to sustainably get a wide receiver without having to quote unquote reach or to trade back and hopefully their guy makes it there kind of thing. But I've been doing mock draft Monday in the Discord for weeks now, and consistently Mika Egbuka isn't there. He gets taken by I think the Seahawks are like 2 picks ahead of the Packers, and I think they take him
Yeah.
consistently. Or like PFF's mock draft simulator has them taking him consistently. So right now, Seattle picks at 18. That's where he usually goes, or he goes to Denver, or he goes to LA. Like he very rarely makes it there. And so if you're the Packers, do you then shift your focus to like a Matthew Golden? And like sure that's fine, but he's not what you need in the in a vacuum. You're drafting him under the understanding that Dontavian Wicks develops into an X receiver, which is hard to rely on because of just how his development has gone so far already. So then, okay, say you're the Packers, and we'll talk about this during our mock draft when we do it. But say you're the Packers and you draft Derek Harmon or you draft insert defensive player here at 23. Okay, well then you go to pick 54 and those guys that we talked about, Alec Manor has been drafted or has been mocked to go like early second, like to um I should pull up the full order so I can reference it. But to like Tennessee who needs a receiver or
Yep.
Vegas who needs a receiver or New England who needs a receiver. Like there's so many teams early on in the second round that need a receiver, which is where Alec Manor goes, which is where Trey Harris sometimes go, which is where Jaden Higgins is going. Like I go to draft the receiver in the second round and doing these mock drafts, and there's none there. I find myself, and again, I feel like I'm getting way ahead of myself in this mock draft, but it's just like the way the draft breaks down for the Packers. This isn't a good time to pick a receiver if they don't pick one at one. To which, if it's a Mika Egbuka, fantastic. I'd love to hear it. But then at the same time, I don't want to reach on Jaden Higgins or reach on a different receiver when I guess the context and it's sort of the idea with this draft is that there's kind of a talent drop off after like 7-8. Like I'm trying to let me pull up like the Tankathon mock draft here. Once you get past like I don't like how their mock draft order, but once you get past Will Johnson ish at 10-11, and then you get into Jelon Walker, Shamar Stewart, Jahad Campbell, Michael Williams, those kind of guys. There's not a lot. There's a significant talent drop off in how scouts and draft experts kind of see this class. It's like Cam Ward, Shadur Sanders, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Ashton Genty, Armand Membu, Will Campbell, Tet McMillan, Tyler Warren, the tight end at Penn State, uh, and Will Johnson are like in that top tier of like guys in the top 10, 15 of the draft. And
Yeah.
then after that, it kind of takes a steep step down, and then it kind of dwindles like from picks 15 to like 50 to where,
Plateaued.
right, it plateaus there. And so it's kind of colored how I think about quote unquote reaching for a guy. If they like Jaden Higgins as a prospect, Emeka Ibuka's off the board, Matthew Golden's off the board, whatever defensive guys are off the board that they want, do they say, hey, we'll just go take the guy we gave a second round grade to in the first so that we know we got a guy. And then you go about the rest of your draft that way. And so I really struggle to understand how this is going to go, and I'm really fascinated. I think I'm more fascinated in how this draft shakes out for the Packers than I have been in the past 2 years, for the sole purpose of like it just it really breaks down poorly for them for the offensive side of the ball because they need a receiver. But for where they pick, I don't know if they'll get a receiver that is top 10 in the position.
It's a tale as old as time. It's part of why they haven't drafted a receiver in the first round since Javon Walker in
I
2002.
wouldn't even say that though. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I wouldn't even say
No,
that. Like they've had opportunity to do so, but I think this is the first time where it's like, if you don't take one at one, you might not get one of the top seven receivers in the draft. Not one, but if you take one at 23, you just might not get that top level receiver in the draft. You might be resigned to taking one in the fourth or fifth and just hoping it works out and trying again next year.
well, I think too, it's just like recency bias is like we have been overwhelmed by wide receiver draft classes that pay off, whether that's Jamar Chase. But if I wish I had this data or Wikipedia entries or whatever it is. Jamar Chase was one of like a couple of wide receivers that went high in that draft that you're like, oh, that guy. Obviously the Justin Jefferson, Jordan Love draft, Brandon Ayuk. Like Brandon Ayuk is going to come back from injury, but still, like those two wide receivers alone were worth the kind of misses with Jalen Rager, with Denzel Mims, guys that were taken high enough that we talked about a lot that cycle and a lot to the Packers because they needed someone. Even um yeah, I mean, again, just countless examples of like really strong wide receiver classes. It's been a pipeline, and they've all, the top guys too. Whereas like some teams have, the Patriots are like notorious for when they've taken a wide receiver in the first round, it's never gone
It,
well.
it never goes well for them. They just can't. They
They
Bill
don't they
Belichick is
don't
bad
produce
at
wide
scouting.
receiver talent. Yeah, exactly. So I think now when we're met with like what pales in comparison to those type of draft classes, which has had hit upon hit in successive years, and now it's been flattened to the point where it's like, well, this guy is interesting. This guy could be a productive wide receiver, but there isn't like the standout guy out. The irony is that there is one, and he might not even play there because he plays two positions,
Yeah, Travis Hunter.
and that's Travis Hunter. So I think knowing that context and knowing that this draft is generally kind of like a toss up from the last 22 picks in the first round
Yeah,
to like and how that will trickle down and inform the rest of the draft from rounds 2 to 7. Like I think this is probably the first year where a lot of the contextual factors are really coloring for the fact that I can't fall in love with the wide receiver. And on top of the fact that the Packers are good and the expectations are for them to be great. So
right.
therefore, you need a
You need
great
to hit on
player
a
to
guy.
come. Yeah, and it's like we're setting up such an unfair line of expectations, but that is the product, or even you could call it the victims of their own success. Of like this is why it sucks getting fast or getting too good too fast
Yeah.
because you need to have everything that locked down, and
Well,
things are going to get in the way.
look at the Commanders. Like they
That's gonna be
they
an
ended up not
interesting.
taking tackles last year. They like missed on them, and so they said, "Screw it, we'll make it in the aggregate." And they needed one, so they went out and traded for one. They went out and traded for Laramie Tunsil. And so, like you talk about like the last draft classes for the receivers to go through, like going back to 2021, like Jamar Chase, Jalen Wild, Devonta Smith, Kadarius Toney, and Rashad Bateman were all first round picks, and like the first three were in the first 10 picks. Kadarius
Yeah.
Toney is mid. Rashad Bateman has been okay, but then the rest of the way down, there really isn't a guy that you'd really would like. Besides Amon-Ra St. Brown, he's the only other. Oh, and Nico Collins too. Nico Collins and Amon-Ra St. Brown are the two guys that weren't first round picks that stand out there. But other than that, nothing to 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 really lust for. 2022, the Christian Watson draft, it's Drake London at 8, Garrett Wilson at 10, Chris Olave at 11, James Williams at 12, Jahan Dotson at 16, and then Traylon Burks at 18. Like those are good players. Traylon
Three
Burks,
out of six, four out
right?
of six, if you want to make the argument.
Yep.
Like,
Again, but all gone before the Packers picked. if I'm
Yep.
not mistaken. Yeah, because they picked at 20,
And
20
it's hard to
something.
pick at
It's
23.
so hard to pick in the early 20s. Like it's just there's this, the talent is so it varies
That's
so
why their
much.
first rounders have always, not always, but generally kind of been more hit or miss.
Hmm. But then 2023, JSN at 20, Quinton Johnson at 21, Zay Flowers at 22, Jordan S at 23. Awesome players. Jaden Reed is at 50. And like that was another good draft. But then look at last year: Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Romo Dunze gone in the first 10 picks. Brian Thomas at 23, which would be Packers would love Brian Thomas at 23 right now.
God.
But then it's just so interesting to think about how this draft will break down for them. So that's
Well,
really
one thing that I don't know if you're segueing into this, but I think the point needs to be made is that out of all these years where, you know, we're coming out of years where the Packers had double digit picks. They had 8 this year, which is not, it's still a good
it's
amount,
it's the
but it
fewest Brian Gutekunst has ever had. It
is
he
that true?
hmm he had 8 in 2021, I think. Let me double check. Either that or 2019. As part of the article I'm working on, I looked at this. Um, and he's had pretty much double digit picks uh,
Mm,
his entire tenure. So eight in he had 9 in 2021. He had 9 in 2022. His first year or his second year, the Rashawn Gary draft, he had 8. That was the year they had two firsts.
and they did some maneuvering,
Yeah.
or they end up with 2 firsts, right?
Yes. They picked
Yes.
Gary and Savage.
I think that's interesting because with like, you know, whether it's founded or not, like moving up. Ted McMillan is kind of the ultimate example of like, do you move up the draft order to do that? But I think this Igbuka is a good stand-in because he probably will be gone by mid first round.
Maybe. Like
Maybe.
if you call mid first round 16, I don't think he's
Yeah.
gone by then cuz I just don't think it shakes out that way. But like he might be gone by 18 to Seattle. Like but if do you trade with Cincinnati to get to go up and pick him? Like what does that price look like? And
And you have the fewest picks that you've.
that you've ever had as Goody, who has come away already from this season and saying they want to get more picks. I think it's very funny that Brian Gutekunst's like, we gotta get more picks, we gotta get more picks. Like this is a man who's gotten fat on 10, 11, 12 pick years.
Yeah.
He's like, that's the standard. We got to have that many picks every year. It's like, my brother in Christ, the Vikings have 3 picks this year. I'm like
Yeah.
pretty sure that's how many they have. They don't have a lot of picks. Let me double check. So I forget. They have 4. The Vikings
4.
pick at 24, 97, 139, and 187. They only have 2 of their own picks. And it's 24 and 97. They got and 97 is a comp pick. And so it's
Yeah.
like, could you imagine Brian Gutekunst picking 4 times? I think he'd quit. And so it's like he goes, we need more draft picks. Like that, like you should be able to fill out a draft class with 8 picks, Brian Gutekunst. Like
They don't need more picks.
and that's the thing too is that they're already young, and I think it's a very interesting way that they've decided to team build. And like we keep teasing it, it's going to come out very soon. The Goody draft, what do we want to call it? Analysis?
Guide.
Yeah, guide per se, and it gives context to a lot of what their team building looks like right now. So that's the last tease we'll do of it. Well, it'll come out soon. You guys will see it regardless. So anything else? Like I guess to put a pin and to put or to bookend and end the conversation on Ted McMillan. I do not think they're trading up for Ted McMillan. I don't think they can afford it. I'd be frankly and happily shocked if they trade up with Ted McMillan because if you look at again the order in the first round, going after 3 because Tennessee's not taking him, neither is Cleveland or the Giants. New England signed Stephon Diggs. They're probably not taking him. The Jaguars could take him if they wanted to at 5. Vegas would probably take him at 6. Maybe the Jets probably don't take him at 7. They have other needs. Carolina desperately needs a wide receiver. Like I think he probably ends up in Carolina if no other shenanigans happen that a team trades up to get him earlier than that. Because like the Panthers just need a young receiver, a young talented receiver. They drafted Xavier Legette last year. He's been okay, but they need a one, and Ted McMillan is the one. And
Yeah.
so, in the context that Travis Hunter isn't here either. Like I think Travis Hunter is going 3 to the Giants, and he'll either play wide receiver or corner kind of thing if they don't get a QB. But then, like New Orleans could use a wide receiver to put next to Chris Olave because his health is a question mark. Uh, Dallas could use a guy next to CeeDee Lamb. Like Indianapolis could probably use a guy. Atlanta doesn't need one. Arizona doesn't really need one. But then now we're to 17, 18, and that's where the Seahawks are picking, and then that's where LA picks if he picks later. And I just don't know if you can afford the price to pay to trade up to 8 with Carolina. I don't think they want to do that.
No. No.
That'd be a premium for them.
I thought a lot of the he's probably the one that I know the most, and obviously he's been probably the most talked about wide receiver on like general NFL podcasts and like of this draft class. And when there was kind of like, oh, it just seems like a guy that doesn't have a good combine or high expectations. It doesn't come back the strongest or kindly look kindly on him. It's like, oh, he's gonna slip, or NFL team's gonna overlook this and that, and it's like there's already so much information on Ted McMillan that like, is this really gonna sink or swim his where he goes in the draft order? Maybe a couple picks, but not by like where the Packers are going.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I get that. I get that. So, all right, folks. Long episode for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Uh, we'll be back next week with our look at the defensive side of the ball. Derek Harmon, James Pierce Jr. Believe that's his name. I don't want to sound like an idiot. Please hold.
I think you're correct.
I think I'm right too, but I don't want to. It is James Pierce
Jimmy
Jr.
Pierce.
Yep. Kenneth Grant, if he makes it to the Packers, a couple other guys, a couple corners that they could use, a couple edge rushers they could use. Going to be a very interesting way this all shakes out. So be sure to join us next week for the defensive side of the ball, and then be sure to tune in a couple weeks when we put out the mock draft for from top. So appreciate you all. Be sure to check out all things GSPN at gspn.info and subscribe to our premium Substack. We just recorded a GSPN After Dark with me, Jordan, and Adam talking about the Bucks' lack of a Mike Budenholzer tribute video, as he returned to Milwaukee this week. That was a good one, albeit a relatively serious one, if that's the case. Not at the beginning. Two really fun stories at the beginning for all you listeners. Uh, $8 a month, ad-free podcast of all the GSPN podcasts, plus all of our written content, and where you'll find my Goody article once it drops. Um,
Brian Gutierrez.
that's right, Brian Gutierrez. The Brewers bounced back from dropping 0-4 with back-to-back wins in a series win versus the Royals. Adam and Andrew are recording Cruising for a Bruising tomorrow morning, so be sure to check out that in your podcast feeds if it's out by now. Um, check out obviously Eurostep and win in 6 and Capture and Celluloid, or make time for this. Can't believe it. That what a blunder. It hasn't been called that in a while. But regardless, thank you for listening. Check out all the GSPN pods. Subscribe. We'd appreciate it. Your support. And Jordan, thank you.
Thank you.